Festus Adedayo, a political scientist, is my guest on State Affairs. You were talking about what led to the formation of the Tribune.
Yes. So Zeke's West African pilot, when it came out in 1937, was a newspaper to behold. But as time went on, the newspaper descended into the purveying of ethnic symbols.
Is that what you call the act of manufacturing, distributing, and common sensing truth?
Exactly. You know, so at some point, the Yoruba elders at the time couldn't stand Zeke's, the usage of symbols in the West African pilot, which was against them. And they also saw the way he was over-promoting the excellence of Igbo stock. As I said earlier, you pick a copy of the West African pilot, and you saw as a lead of the newspaper an Igbo man who just came back from America with a BA, which is celebrated. And so if a Yoruba man had such excellence, he tucked it somewhere, maybe on the back page of the newspaper. And so the Yoruba elders didn't like it, coupled with the fact that at the establishment of the Egbe Omo Odudua, Azikiwe felt threatened, and he wrote an editorial in the West African Pilot of September 8, 1948, which he said, inside, let me just quote him a little bit, he said, henceforth, the battle against the Egbe Omo Odudua and his leaders, up hill and down dale, must be done immediately. The fascist organization of Sir Adeyemo Alakija has been dismembered. And so all these symbols apparently didn't go down well with the Yoruba leaders. And as such, they also needed to have their own voice. And so in 1949, coincidentally, next month is going to be 70 years.
Yeah.
It was decided that the Tribune should be funded. And you had people, of course, Chief Obafemi Awolowo spearheaded it. He had friends all over. I mean, the Oni of Ife at the time and so many others came together to fund the Tribune. And they also started promoting their symbols.
Is that why you said here that the Nigerian Tribune newspaper, established in 1949 by Chief Obafemi Awolowo, followed the predilection of newspapers of the First Republic to be megaphones of political parties, and it was particularly founded for the purpose of being used as an ideological weapon?
Exactly. It was an ideological weapon. That was my submission. Don't forget that I researched the Tribune from its establishment in 1949 to 1993. I even did a post-Awolowo examination of the Tribune. And what I found out was that it was a media institution that was established to construct reality, in accordance with the ideological positions of its founders. And if you see all the wars that were fought at the time the Tribune was there, fighting those ideological wars with the founder of the Tribune. And I also submitted later on when the war began between Chief Obafemi Awolowo and S.L. Akintola, that even though S.L. Akintola was a journalist, was a lawyer, he was even the editor of the Daily Service at some point. He wrote that editorial, I've forgotten the title now, attacking Nnamdi Azikiwe, that he called, I think something Deleuze. Something Deleuze, I've forgotten how he put it. He was a fierce writer. But unfortunately for him, apparently he was overwhelmed or he was sucked into the war, that he couldn't deploy the media, that he himself knows the power. In fact, for instance, immediately after the emergency, the first press conference that S.L. Akintola granted, he used an analogy. He said, a farmer could not affect the lives of more than 35 people, but that a media man, a journalist, could send messages to over 1 million people. But unfortunately for him, he went into that war, the war between him and Awolowo, without a media weapon.
How did he even lose the Daily Service?
Yes, by the time he went into full-time politics, he had to resign from the daily service as editor. And by the time that war started, that newspaper was being edited by Lateef Jakonde, who was a staunch woman.
Jakonde never liked Akintola?
Of course, there was no way he could like Akintola. And to worsen it, his student, Akintola's student at the Baptist Academy, that is BC Onabanjo, was also editing, I've forgotten the name of the second newspaper now, major newspapers, apart from the Tribune and Iroyin Yoruba, which were used to wage the war against him. So by the time he established a Rawowuro newspaper, and there was another one, and the sketch in 1964, the war had been won and lost.
Let's look at what he said.
Yes.
In your thesis, he said SLA Akintola did not have any newspaper support to back him in 1962.
Exactly.
When he went to war against Awo.
Exactly.
He may have been a veteran journalist, but the Daily Service was now a weekly magazine.
Exactly.
And worse for him, it was being edited by L.K. Jakonde, one of the group whom SLA so much disliked.
Yes, yes.
It continues. The other newspaper sympathetic to the AG and his government of the West was the very popular Daily Express. But the editor-in-chief was BC Onabanjo, who had never liked SLA.
Yes.
In addition, the financial backer of that paper was Chief S.O. Shonibare,
Yes.
whom SLA was planning to put into trouble with Awo.
Exactly.
In Ibadan, there were 3 newspapers, Southern Nigeria Defender,
Yes.
which was as good as dead,
Yes.
and the Nigerian Tribune and Iroyin Yoruba, which were Awo's newspapers. When SLA and his group started Morning Star and Imole Owuro in 1963 for NNDP purposes, it was too late, and his new government newspaper, Daily Sketch, which started publishing in 1965, could not help him more.
Exactly. That was exactly what happened at the time.
Was the press responsible for what happened to Akintola?
In fact, some analysts have said that the Nigerian press of the First Republic should be held responsible for the crisis of the Nigerian state at the moment, because they in a way escalated the crisis. You had so many sensational reports. If Akintola sneezed in 1964, Sketch was going to report it positively. When Awolowo was in prison, the Tribune and the newspapers that were, loyal to the action group of the time, literally painted Awolowo as a saint, as an icon.
Was Awolowo not a saint?
Yeah, he was an icon, but
not a saint.
I don't think so. He was a human being. And so, and they, in a way, demolished SL Akintola in a very devastating manner.
Demolished?
They demolished him in a devastating way that you would think that Akintola was just a heap of rubbish. But that was a brilliant man. That was an icon of the Yoruba nation. I wonder if we had an association of SL Akintola and Awolowo, if the West would not have grown far more than it is at the moment.
Look at how the Tribune described Akintola in some few words. Hybrid opportunist. The Tribune called him worst fascist Nigeria has ever produced. The Tribune called him a shameless liar. The Tribune called him a vile tribal campaigner.
No, it was horrible.
But he knew the war he was going into.
Yeah, that's still what I really can't explain now. Because if he knew, apparently he didn't plan for that war. And by the time the war came, he was overwhelmed. But, Awolowo was a long-distance runner. And he knew ab initio the importance of the weaponry of the newspaper press. And he deployed it actively, so much that till today, many of the developmental projects that SL Akintola got for the Western region, nobody attributes them to him any longer. In fact, they say that it was Awolowo who constructed those things.
Is that the power of media?
It's the power of the media, because the average man, don't forget that there was an acute illiteracy even at that time. What people read or they read to them became the gospel truth. The Tribune promoted Awolowo as, and whatever he said, as the views of the average Nigerian.
Is that why you say his views were universalized?
They universalized him.
But he was a great mind.
He was a great mind. But you see, the way he was, of course, he also had his drawbacks like every human being. But you never saw his drawbacks in the media of the time. And that was, from my analysis, was like a hegemonist portrayal of the rules of Chief Obafemi Awolowo, and conversely, to dismantle whatever SL Akintola stood for. And SL became premier in 1959. Between 1959, before the crisis started, go and read the Tribune. He was the best man ever. SL Akintola, from the portrayal in the Tribune, in the daily service, he was the best man ever. Brilliant orator. He was a great administrator. And so all those were portrayals in the media at the time. But immediately the crisis started, you began to see all such, reading and portrayals of SL Akintola like a vile anarchist and all that.
He wanted to be his own man. Was that fair to Awolowo?
You see, it depends on wherever you were looking at it from. Some political scientists, Billy Dudley, looked at the crisis as having arisen out of an ideological disagreement that Awolowo favored a socialist, view of society, while Akintola, had a capitalistic bent, in terms of the way he saw society.
He was also a conservative.
And some other people also said that, no, look, the crisis wasn't ideological. It was a crisis between two wives of two prominent men. Chief Adedayo, who was the wife of SL Akintola, a very strong woman, and the wife of Baba Awolowo, H.I.D. Awolowo, also couldn't stomach Fadera's kind of what she called opportunism of the period.
But Akintola went against party's law. He started hacking Awolowo's men, people like Parawane.
Yes, Odeku. Even the man you mentioned now, Shoni Bare, was looked at as the financier of the party. But, when the crisis started and the Coca inquiry began, according to Akintola, they began to see Shoni Bare from another light. They said whenever Shoni Bare entered the government house, all of them would stand up because they felt he was the financier. But from the Coca inquiry, they began to see that Shoni Bare was actually, it was allegedly the Western region money that was diverted to Shoni Bare's pockets, with which he was funding the party. So, but I think the crisis essentially was the two elders, the two leaders didn't really understand what role they were to play. Don't forget that in 1959, when Awolowo said he had told God and man that he wasn't going to go back and do a second term, and he needed to go to the federal, and having lost, he became a leader of the opposition. And when he became leader of the opposition, some like one Okunowo who really attacked Awolowo, the Ijebu man who said Awolowo had gone senile.
That he warned him.
That he warned him not to go to the federal. People, but the man said he had spoken with his God and with men that he wasn't going to go back. And he wasn't going to choose Akintola as his successor.
He wanted Rotimi Williams.
He wanted Rotimi Williams. Some people said he wanted, some people even said he wanted Enauro.
Yeah.
And all that. So, but people like Chief Eso Gbadamosi, who were very close to Awolowo, had to prevail over him to pick S.L. Akintola. But Awolowo said it ab initio that when he saw S.L. Akintola, he saw a potential traitor. First and foremost, S.L. Akintola spoke Hausa fluently. He was an orator, far more oratorical than even Papa Obafemi Awolowo. Don't forget all his sayings those days when there was a crisis at the University of Lagos between Professor Saburi Biobaku and Professor Eninjoku. And he said, look, Anika fun yin leni tí ò bá kú, ẹlẹ́ni tí ń jòkú gan lẹ́fẹ́. Meaning that we wanted to give you Professor Sabiru Biobaku, whom, if you translate his name, somebody who doesn't want to die. And then you said you wanted Professor Eni Njoku, who wants to hit the dead. You know, he was a polyglot. He was a very deep man.
We'll talk more after this break. The program is State Affairs. Dr. Festus Adedayo is my guest.